In the Know, a radio program talking to the newsmakers in Ogle, Lee, DeKalb counties and beyond, keeping you in the know. Here's your host, Charles Van Horn.
Good morning and happy Sunday. Another edition of In the Know. And joining us in studio, Representative Bradley Fritts. Good morning.
Good morning, Charles. So great to be with you as always.
Yeah, exciting times. You're off for a bit, so you're out not only touring the district, doing fun things for the district, and, I hate to say this, school is coming up soon.
It absolutely is. Every year I grew up in Dixon, and we have our Petunia Festival over the 4th of July, and that was always the milestone that it seemed like as soon as you hit Petunia Festival time and that was over, the summer goes by in the blink of an eye, and we're back to school so soon.
If you are a school-aged child, just turn your radio off now and just pretend summer vacation is continuing. You have something great going on. It's your second annual school supply drive. And how great is that to get necessary supplies in the hands of the kids that need them so they can start the school year off on the right foot?
Right now, especially the way our economy is with inflation going through the roof, I don't know if you've been to the grocery store lately, but it's hard to get out of any grocery store under $100 anymore.
I don't use a cart. I only buy what I can carry. That's how I keep the bill under $100.
Well, you don't have very big arms,
exactly,
so I guess that works for you. But no, on a serious note, though, families across rural Illinois and across America are struggling right now. And we want to make sure that we set our students up in the 74th District for the best success possible. So we are doing our second annual school supply drive that's going to run the last 2 weeks of the month of July here. It's going to be so exciting to let the people who are more fortunate within the community be able to help out some of these kids who are less fortunate.
And in Rochelle, if you want to drop those off, you can drop off the supplies at the Rochelle Chamber. But you got places all over your district where you can drop off school supplies. The list of that is all at your website, right?
Yes, all of it. We have various locations and community partners across the district who are taking in school supplies. The list of those is on my website, repfritts.com, repfritts.com.
Very good. School, back in session. You guys will be back in session. When do you go back to Springfield?
So we go back for veto session the second and third week of November. So we got a little bit of a break here. Unfortunately, unfortunately, it's an election year. So the General Assembly will be out until after good old November 5th.
Now, this time of year in the news, the governor has been signing a lot of legislation that passed through both bodies. So he's sort of out grandstanding, taking a lot of high fives and everything else for signing bills into law. But a lot of stuff you guys tried to get through this year probably will not be signed by the governor.
Oh, it won't be signed by the governor because it never made it out of the House or the Senate. Unfortunately, the House is... The General Assembly in general is very polarized towards the majority party, and it's really sad. I mean, years ago, there were, true statesmen on both sides of the aisle who would ensure that, if a minority party represented a third of the chamber, that a third of the bills that got called were of the minority party. Unfortunately, times have changed, and they're not always for the better. And our current speaker, Speaker Welch, has an unwritten rule, that if you have 60 Democratic members on a bill, they can throw it up on the board. If you got 60 votes, it gets called, regardless of what it is. And that's, it's something that's not always great, but it is what it is at this point in time.
Springfield politics, again, as a Republican, you are in the minority, dealing with a overwhelming Democratic majority in both houses. How do you get any piece of legislation that is crafted by you or others in your party? How do you even get eyes from the Democrats on it to even get close to the 60 votes to get it towards the floor?
It's all about making good bipartisan relationships. The day that I came into office, I can do math.
Yeah.
You have to have 60 votes to pass anything through the General Assembly. And if I sit in a super minority of 78 to 40, do the math. I need at least 20 friends on the other side of the aisle and all of my own Republican colleagues if I want to move anything. So I set out to make those bipartisan relationships, and I made tons of good bipartisan relationships. Because of those relationships, I've been able to move some different pieces of legislation. In my first term here, I've been able to move 6 pieces of legislation out of the House. And I've been able to stop some bills that, aren't in the best interest of our community. So it's just about working to build those relationships and learning about other people's communities and teaching them about your own.
With the campaign season coming up, obviously you'll be maybe seeing new faces and saying goodbye to other faces, as always happens every time there is an election and things change over. You'll have your own re-election bid to get through as well. But going into that veto session this fall, what do you think is going to be some of the big bills that you guys either want to make sure they get through or that maybe you want to make sure are vetoed?
I can't really, off the top of my head,
Yeah.
there isn't really a ton that I anticipate on moving. It always makes me nervous, especially when we come in after an election cycle. We have those first 2 weeks of veto, and then the new General Assembly is sworn in at 12 noon on the second Wednesday of January. And so January 1st, we go back to a situation where we have 60 votes can pass a bill, whereas veto session, it requires 71. As we go into after January 1st, we have what they call lame duck session. Mm-hmm. As you and I both know, lame duck session is where a lot of the crazy pieces of legislation that have been harmful to our communities, such as, the Safety Act and the assault weapons ban, these high level things that aren't necessarily completely sniffed out, they come into play.
And they get voted on by people with nothing left to lose.
Absolutely, because their election cycles are over. They're retiring, they got beat, they got whatever. They just throw random stuff up on the board and see what sticks. And it's a very, very scary time for Illinois residents.
Let's talk about a piece of legislation that you were able to sort of slow down for a little bit. It will rear its head again, I'm sure. It's the turning over of Shabana State Park and the areas around that back to the Potawatomi, which was the background on this is, again, the federal government way back in the day, before you and I were born, that's for sure, made an agreement with Potawatomi leaders that area, 1,500 acres, give or take, would be sort of their reservation going forward. And then Chief Shabana leaves town to go to Kansas or something, and then they just take it over, which was the betrayal by, I assume, federal officials, I guess, right, in the 1850s. I mean, that's not really clear.
Department of Interior, there's so many intricacies to this, and I was under the assumption of that same thing because that's what the Native Americans had told me, but then I come to find a title agreement in the Newberry Library in Chicago. After doing some digging, it is a legal binding document that Shabana himself in 1845 sold one of his 2 sections to 2 gentlemen from Lee County. And for, I think it was $1,200, he sold 680 acres or whatever. And what's unbelievable about this is things, it says right there in the legal document, there's people who attested to money changing hands. There's people who attested to the fact that Shabana had a translator to ensure that everything was proper. And so here we have a document that says that he did this transaction. Well, we take it back to them and they say, well, because it is federal treaty land, the only person who has the authority to sell that land is Congress, or to give that land away and take it out of federal treaty. Shabana himself had no authority to sell that. It's
but he made $1,200.
Yeah. I mean, to which now it doesn't seem like a lot for land, but back in 1845 it was.
That was a substantial amount. Then,
my gosh, yes.
And for those with confusion, we are saying Shabana correctly because Chabanais is, in fact, how you pronounce the
Chief's name. Absolutely.
And Shabana. And again, growing up, it was always Chief Shabana. And it wasn't until really this whole thing spun up that I guess we all got educated that his name was Chabanais.
It was. It
sounds French.
We're going to have a lot of conversations as far as this piece of legislation goes moving forward. We're going to start to have some community meetings. I had sent out a survey in the district, and usually when you send out a survey, you don't get a whole lot of response to them. This survey in particular, I sent out a survey to everyone who lived within a 15-mile radius of the park, and I had over 200 responses come back to my office with an overwhelming no, they didn't want this to go through.
And in fairness to the Potawatomi, they have gone out of their way to purchase land already in that area.
For sure.
And I guess, there is nothing stopping them from purchasing any land that comes available. But the real crux of this thing is the state park.
Absolutely. And, they're making an agreement, and it's just a verbal agreement, frankly. They're saying, because the land that was originally set aside in treaty, the 1,280 acres, it represents part of the state park. It represents part of the DeKalb County Forest Preserve, and it represents part of 30 private landowners. And they're saying that they still have a claim to that land, and they could take it to court, but they're doing us a favor. And they won't take it to court as long as we give them the park, the entirety of the park. And so they're saying that they're going to clear our property owner titles, which normally would be a pretty good thing, except for the fact that, once again, Congress is the only one who has the authority to make that exchange happen. So until then, not only are we giving away the park, but we still have 30 private property owners who are in limbo.
Yeah.
And that's just absolutely unacceptable. We're not going to give away a $15 million asset without an absolute guarantee that our people aren't going to get touched. Who's to say that this doesn't drag out another 100 years, and then the next, the chairman's grandson who becomes chairman files a lawsuit and now displaces these people when we already traded for their property.
Do you see this legislation going forward in the lame duck session, maybe, or some variation of it?
We shall see. Right now it's about having conversations within our community, seeing, what is going to be important to people within the community and how they want to proceed moving forward.
You've been out and about in the district doing coffee and conversations and having your offices here, there, and everywhere. What are some of the things people in the district have been talking to you about that are important to them?
Two major things. I mean, I talk to a lot of the seniors of our district who are on fixed incomes, and their biggest concern is their property taxes. Everybody's property taxes are going up, and their taxes are going up because their assessed values are going up, and their assessed values are going up because of inflation. Right now, it's just such a struggle time, and a lot of that I blame on the state of Illinois and the General Assembly.
Yeah.
We have regularly passed down unfunded mandates that municipalities, counties, townships, cities, school districts have to comply with without any funding attached to them to comply with.
Yeah. And again, local governments, county and city, are the ones that control the property taxes.
Absolutely.
And you're just saying that, again, that the state level is putting extra levels of bureaucracy, really, as it were.
That's all it is.
On counties and townships and cities. And they have nowhere else to turn to for money but to the landowners.
Well, I'll give you an example. So, from a state level, as you had just said, we can raise taxes in the form of various different things. You can raise sales taxes. You can raise income taxes. You can generate different tax revenue from gaming and all this other stuff. Your municipalities have one form of revenue generation. The only thing that they can do is raise your property taxes.
Yeah.
So I'll use my home county of Lee County for an example. When the Safety Act came into existence in last year, in order to comply with the Pretrial Fairness Act, they had to they estimated that it was going to cost them an extra $500,000 a year to operate the same court system that they'd been operating for basically ever. An extra $500,000. You couple that with last year, the governor robbed a bunch of money out of PPRT, the Personal Property Replacement Tax Fund, to where every entity that receives those funds took a 20% haircut. Going into last budget cycle in my home county of Lee, they had to come up with roughly $1.1 million deficit that was came from those two things, one losing revenue and one trying to comply with pretrial fairness.
And you can't turn Route 30 into a tollway to pay for that, can you?
You can't. And it's just sad because, people want to jump on top of all your municipal governments, but their hands are tied because the state government is failing to comply with, the things that they said they were going to do in the first place. LGDF, Local Government Distributive Fund, is a huge issue. I mean, municipalities were promised to get 10%, and now they're in the high 6%. So when you're not coming up with the money that you say you're going to come up with in an agreement, you can see why there's an issue.
Representative Bradley Fritts, thank you for joining us this morning. Good luck to the battles in Springfield, and hopefully in February you'll still be down there fighting for the people in your district.
Hey, thank you so much, Charles. And for all the listeners, if you want to be able to stay in touch with things that are happening, we send out a newsletter update every other week via email. You can sign up on my website at repfritts.com.
Thank you for listening to this week's In the Know. The program returns next week at this time with another great conversation with someone from your community.